Scott Bolden, who joins us to talk more about this historic moment in American criminal history. Scott, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So we are talking right off the top about the historic nature here of this happening. And you just heard Rob ask how quickly this process could move. There's something called the Speedy Trial Act that requires people to move through this criminal process quickly. So what is your guess about how quickly things move now that we know that there is an indictment toward an arraignment and a potential trial?
Well, the indictment has to be unsealed by the grand jury judge. As you know, I'm a former prosecutor from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. And so the indictment hasn't been unsealed, or as we would say, handed down yet. This is what the leaks have reported. So that's a process. Now, you got to remember, next week you got Passover and Easter coming. They don't have to unseal this indictment at any time, in any given time frame. He's just been indicted. The Speedy Trial Act starts to run once he is arraigned, if you will, whether it's state or federal. So there's no speedy time requirements right now. That's the first thing. Second of all, I think New York and the police and the criminal justice system and the prosecutors will get together to work to make sure and to see how this plays out, or how they lay it out for security purposes. And then thirdly, there'll be communications with Joe Tacopino, his lawyer, Trump's lawyer, in regard to when he will be submitted for fingerprints and processed for arrest before he appears in court, usually the same day. You get there a little early, they process him, and then he will appear in court with his lawyer. He'll plead not guilty to the charges, but you got the Secret Service involved. So this will take a lot of coordination if the reports are correct that he has been indicted.
The Manhattan District Attorney's Office is no stranger to high-profile individuals either getting indicted or in the grand jury room. So what specifically do you think steps that are happening right now in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office as they prepare, assuming it is correct that President Trump has been indicted, as they prepare to move forward to those next steps you're talking about? What's happening in those hallways right now behind the scenes?
Well, they're not celebrating. This is the beginning, not the end of this process. There's some relief that we got this done, but this took years of investigation. And so they're crossing their T's, dotting their I's, and then they're talking about logistics, right? How do we make this happen, right? How do we protect our people if they're protesters? Remember, protecting this people is really important. Their people is really important. Secondly, they're on the phone with the criminal defense lawyers. They're announcing, or they have told him already, he's been indicted, right? Thirdly, you know, he can talk and say whatever he wants to say, but psychologically, being indicted, which is not a conviction, he's still innocent until proven guilty. They're also talking to the defense attorney, they may be, about what's in the indictment, what those charges are, and then when do you want to submit it? And how do we go through logistics on that? But in the hallways of the district attorney's office, they're just doing their job, basically. Given it's a high-profile matter, this office has a strong national history of being first, whether it was BCCI in the 80s or whether it was the feds fighting with the state, with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office as to who was going to take the lead on criminal conduct taking place in New York. And so they're just getting ready. They're doing their jobs, right? But they want to choreograph this the right way because they're under public scrutiny and a defendant that has no problem using his bully pulpit to round up and get his supporters riled up. And so a lot of logistics going on right now, as well as working with the police, the Secret Service, and the criminal defense lawyers right now.
Scott Bolden, this is Jim Lokay. Thank you very much for joining us on this. Obviously not the last we're going to talk about this, but right now we want to get to Congressman Glenn Ivey, who's joining us live now. Congressman joining us live here on Fox 5, somebody who's had quite a bit of experience when it comes to prosecution in your role in the U.S. Attorney's Office. Sir, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
As we look at this case, and just excuse me for a moment here, Go ahead.
I just want to pick up on a piece that Scott Bolden just mentioned, which is that Trump is willing to use his own bully pulpit here. We have seen the former president take to Truth Social and make some comments publicly about the Manhattan District Attorney, about this case. What do you make of any potential threats or any comments that have been made publicly by the subject of this criminal investigation, and now, as we're learning, the subject of criminal charges by this office?
Well, President Trump's already made a series of statements that I thought were over the line. Frequently you have political people who've been indicted who make statements and accuse the prosecutors of, being politically motivated. But in this instance, the baseball bat with, DA Bragg and the next, right next to him, the statements about the destruction and the like in the event that he's indicted. I thought they all crossed the line. Typically a defendant and his team would be thinking about potential impact on a jury because those kinds of statements, I think, could be really, counterproductive to say the least, and potentially blow back on him if he's not careful. But I don't think, Donald Trump's going to be reined in by that in any way.
There was a lot of talk when we had a changing of the guard of the Manhattan DA's office, because they went from Cy Vance, who was the district attorney for Manhattan for some time, and when he left the office, there was speculation that maybe he was also dropping any pursuit of Donald Trump here. Why did we see this reignition, this interest in a case that many people had believed was over and done with?
Well, I'm not sure. I think that it was over and done with, or that people thought that. I think there was a transition that was going on, and I think, not surprisingly, there was a lot of interest in being very careful about moving forward with an indictment in this instance. And so I think they wanted to do a thorough and objective investigation before they, ended up where they have. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the right way to have gone.
Congressman, what do you make of the nature of the charges here? We know that federal investigators and law enforcement and prosecutors decided not to pursue criminal charges against President Trump, although they did pursue them against Michael Cohen. And folks who are much more familiar with New York state law than I am say that this is an untested charge, potentially, in the New York courts, if in fact they did indict him for a felony related to this bookkeeping record issue that was maybe used to either further or conceal another crime. What do you make of that being the type of charge that is potentially at issue here for the first time a former United States president is indicted? Unprecedented upon unprecedented.
Congressman Ivey, we're having a brief glitch with his audio there. Sir, I don't know if sometimes with Zoom, sometimes the mute button, that's all it takes, and it closes you out there. But we are continuing to talk here with Congressman Glenn Ivey, who was just elected to Congress within the last year or so. Sir, are you there with us?
Can you hear me?
We got you now, sir. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I think, we'll have to see exactly what the final charges are, and they can always, pursue a superseding indictment if they think additional charges are merited. But, this is unprecedented. A president's never been indicted before, a former president. But at the end of the day, I think the DA decided that the rule of law had to prevail and that nobody was above the law. So, we'll have to see what the charges are and how they play out. But I think it's important for prosecutors to not be afraid about charging even powerful people and speaking truth to power.
So you're a member of the Judiciary Committee, and we know that over the last couple of weeks, as more details have come out, many of your Republican colleagues have immediately called for investigations into DA Bragg, calling him to testify before the Congress, before the committee, about what they believe was political motivation here and nothing more. So we know those calls are going to continue. They're going to intensify now that the indictment has come down. In your role as a congressman on that committee, what's your approach going to be to those calls here?
Well, I already blasted the three members of Congress who sent that letter to DA Bragg. I thought it was way over the line in a variety of ways. First of all, to the extent it demanded grand jury secrecy information, that's illegal in New York, and it's a felony potentially. They didn't draw any distinctions with respect to work product. or other types of privileges that the DA might have. But, more importantly, it just seemed like it was an effort to really try and intimidate the DA and or the grand jury. And apparently that fell flat. So now they're going to have to go forward, just like everybody else, through the courts and potentially with a jury deciding at the end of this whether the former president, was guilty or innocent or not.
Congressman, putting aside a potential federal body, Congress here getting involved in what is a state criminal investigation, the public perception here that this is a Democratic state's attorney here going after the leading candidate for 2024 in the Republican Party and a former president. What do you make of the public's perception here of the politics that may or may not be involved?
Well, whenever you indict, a political figure, and certainly a former president like Trump falls in that category, there's going to be political crosswinds. I just think it's important to make sure that, the prosecutors and their offices decide to follow the law and the evidence and go wherever it takes them, as opposed to letting politics, influence the decision making they may be making.
Can you walk us through the procedural steps that are about to happen? We've talked a little bit about how President Trump, from public reports, will go through the typical booking process, then arraignment, and then he will enter a plea of guilty or not guilty. But can you walk us through what happens now from this moment where an indictment has been the grand jury has voted on an indictment, and presumably the foreperson has been walking to the judge and delivered that indictment all the way through to a potential trial here?
Yeah, I mean, the next step is the grand jury judge, the one who oversees and supervises the grand jury, issues the indictment, and it becomes public. They typically would make arrangements in a case like this for a defendant to turn himself in, go through the booking process. There'd be an in-court arraignment where the judge reads the charges to the defendant. I would assume Donald Trump is going to plead not guilty, and then they start setting court dates for moving forward. After that, you'll have discovery that takes place. That means the prosecutors provide the documents and information that they think is the basis of their case. They send that to the defense so they can start preparing the defense for trial. To the extent there's discovery coming from the defense, they send it to the prosecutors. There might be motions in this case, motions to exclude information, maybe based on privilege. There's going to be a ways to go, I think, before this reaches a jury. But I think it'll be, fully litigated. I'm not expecting any kind of plea offer or plea agreement here. I think it's going to be resolved by a jury at the end of the day.
We just want to set the stage for what people are seeing on their screen. In fact, you just saw it a moment ago with camera crews outside of the Manhattan courthouse where this grand jury has been convening. There it is once again. We don't anticipate seeing any major activity, but if you're watching us right now and you're just tuning in, and you obviously know the news by this point that former President Donald Trump has been indicted by that grand jury in New York over his alleged role in that hush money payment to Stormy Daniels. Again, we are waiting to get our hands on some of those documents that will be coming out, but we're continued to be joined right now by former Prince George's County State's Attorney and current Congressman Glenn Ivey.
You can see that the barricades, at least the shorter barricades, are up. Those have been up outside the courthouse before. Last week, President Trump saying that he was anticipating getting arrested and calling for folks to take to the streets. Obviously, safety is a big priority here, particularly in the wake of responses in the past to calls for this type of activity. That actually raises a question as a prosecutor when you were deciding whether to move forward with criminal charges. To what extent do you consider outside factors like that, the risk to the public and the risk that this could create threats outside the courthouse and around New York?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen a few cases in recent times, some of the police excessive force cases, for example, in Minneapolis, where there was preparations were made by public safety officials, in preparation for the announcement of a verdict. I don't know that I've seen it, earlier, this early in the case, other than sort of sporadic protesters being out there. But you never know with, Donald Trump, how it might play out and what statements he might make to try and whip up the crowd and get them to come out as well. But, I think at the end of the day, We just have to make sure we protect the process and the courts. And if that means we need to have police out on the street to keep things under control, I think that's what needs to happen.
All right, Congressman Glenn Ivey, thank you for joining us here. We are continuing to follow this breaking news here on Fox 5, and we're back after this.